Most people, when they hear the name Sun Tzu, they think of battlefields, generals, and strategy quotes shared by entrepreneurs who usually haven't even read the book. He is presented as a philosopher of victory, as if he were a mystical thinker who glorified war and decoded the psychology of conflict. But this narrative completely misses the truth, because once you set aside the slogans, cliches, and myths, a far more interesting figure than Sun Tzu emerges. He was not obsessed with winning wars. He was obsessed with avoiding them. What concerned him was not glory, heroism, or absolute domination. What concerned him was cost. And in a world that constantly exhausted itself through endless warfare, Sun Tzu became one of the first thinkers to openly state an uncomfortable truth. The greatest threat to a state is not the enemy it faces. The real threat is the bill that arrives after the war is over. People think the art of war is about fighting. In reality, this book is about money. It is about finance, resources, and sustainability. In short, it is about the intersection of power and economics, because history shows us again and again, power is never as simple as we imagine. To understand why Sun Tzu said what he said, we must look at the era he lived in. His ideas did not emerge in a vacuum. On the contrary, they were the product of a world crushed under its own ambitions. China in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE, the late spring and autumn period and the early warring states era. Fragmented kingdoms, endless wars, and everyone claiming, "I will unify them." War was no longer the exception. It was the routine. Alliances were formed and broken. Armies grew larger with every passing decade. Symbolic clashes of aristocrats gave way to massive armies mobilizing tens of thousands of soldiers. This meant war was no longer merely a military matter. It was a matter of agriculture, taxation, production, logistics, and money. The moment a king sent an army on campaign, he was effectively borrowing from his future, and most of the time the repayment of that debt was devastating. Today we imagine ancient wars as heroic tales. But in that era, war was first and foremost logistics. The moment an army moved, expenses began. Grain, animals, weapons, craftsmen, blacksmiths, cooks, porters, all had to be fed, all consumed resources. A campaign lasting a few months could be enough to collapse a small state. A campaign lasting a year could cripple even a large one, yet no one could stop. Because everyone lived in insecurity. This was an arms race long before the modern age, and the system was tearing itself apart. It was in this world that Sun Tzu emerged, not as a quiet sage, but as someone trying to solve an economic crisis disguised as a military problem. In the West, we romanticize him, but in reality he was not a philosopher. He was almost a risk analyst. He looked at numbers. He looked at timelines. He looked at resources. And he realized that the way states were waging war was unsustainable. Victory meant nothing if the treasury collapsed. Yet many rulers could not see this. They thought the enemy army was the greatest threat. Sun Tzu saw that the real enemy was expenditure itself. That is why the most important sentence of The Art of War comes right at the beginning. War is of vital importance to the state, he says. Vital because it is dangerous, destructive. And if left uncontrolled, it can destroy the very state it is meant to defend. The rest of the book is essentially an answer to a single question. How can war be made limited, controlled, and as cheap as possible? Even his most famous line is misunderstood for this reason. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This is not a parable of wisdom. It is pure cost accounting, achieving results without burning capital. When he says prolonged wars benefit no country, he's not being romantic. He's being an accountant. His emphasis on speed, intelligence, deception, and psychological advantage comes from the same place, because these are cheaper than armies. Sun Tzu's goal was not to win more wars, but to protect states from bankruptcy. Before him, war was a matter of honor and ritual. But as populations grew and weapons changed, war became a massive economic burden. States built monetary systems, organized taxation, created bureaucracies. War became a national project, and at the same time a bankruptcy risk. Sun Tzu recognized this before anyone else. That is why he read war like a balance sheet. He intuitively calculated supply chains, resource depletion, opportunity costs. He disliked glory-seeking generals, because he knew one truth. Every decision on the battlefield is actually a decision about the financial future of the state. When the art of war is read through this lens, it ceases to be poetry and becomes a spreadsheet. Even the 5 fundamental factors he describes are about resource management. The stability of the state, the resilience of the people, the discipline of administration, these are not mystical concepts. They are financial indicators. His focus on logistics is no coincidence. He explicitly states that the farther an army moves from home, the more its costs multiply. Transporting supplies is more expensive than feeding soldiers. Prolonged campaigns destroy agriculture. Wasteful commanders bankrupt their countries. He advocates using the enemy's resources because it is a necessity. He considers leaders who prolong campaigns not indecisive but irresponsible. To Sun Tzu, logistics does not follow strategy. Logistics is strategy. His view of intelligence is the same. A single accurate piece of information can prevent thousands of soldiers from marching in the wrong direction. He did not call this courage. He called it data. He saw information as the cheapest weapon. His emphasis on speed is not aggression, but cost reduction. Waiting is expensive. Maneuver is cheaper than attrition. Sun Tzu's praise of flexibility is, in fact, financial discipline. He is not against war. He is against waste. He is against unnecessary wars. The greatest mistake is entering conflicts that were never needed. That is why he praises those who win without bloodshed. Diplomacy, deterrence, alliances, these are not side paths for him, but the main road. Because they preserve capital. History has proven him right. States that poured their wealth into prolonged wars collapsed. Those that managed costs survived. And this lesson still applies today. Vietnam, Afghanistan, World War I. It was not armies that collapsed, but economies. Sun Tzu would immediately recognize this pattern. Today, cyber warfare, sanctions, and proxy wars all operate on the same logic, creating impact at the lowest cost. The world is still living inside Sun Tzu's balance sheet. His core lesson is this: power is not about how hard you strike, but how long you can keep striking. States collapse not because they lose wars, but because they exhaust themselves. The Art of War is not a book of courage. It is a book of restraint, not a book of conquest, but of sustainability. Sun Tzu was not a warrior. He was a steward, someone concerned with the long-term health of the state. And his message still holds. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it never loses its rhythm. If you fail to understand it, you will pay the price again.